So thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar. I will present a short summary of the new GARDP business strategy. This strategy has been discussed with the board of directors of GARDP fairly recently, just in our last board meeting this month, and has been approved by our board of directors. However, the full business plan will be launched in October during the World Health Summit. So what you will really see here is a top level perspective of the strategy. Obviously one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar is to also get some input from you in the external environment. So we very much welcome your questions as well. I will start with a very general slide, really identifying why antimicrobial resistance is a global issue and currently is a global crisis. And we believe it is a threat to public health, and has been noted it is also a threat to Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, and is widely seen as a risk in achieving universal health coverage, as well as a health security issue in its own right. But of course, the impact of AMR goes beyond health. There is direct impact on poverty, on trade, obviously on healthcare costs, but also on livestock output, considering the One Health dimension of antimicrobial resistance. And what you can see in this slide is really all the different areas, for instance, where antimicrobial resistance will impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. I think for all of us in this audience, it's very important that we emphasize these, I would say, cross-sectoral impact of what is becoming a very important issue. Of course, when we then look in a more narrow perspective in the research and development landscape, and particularly when we talk about research and development for new therapeutics, there are several aspects that have really led to our current situation where we see a highly unfavorable environment, and I'm saying that as an understatement. In fact, that is actually due to multiple factors. On the one hand, we have growing public health needs. And in fact, we have multiple indications, needs, and populations that we have to address. We have very clear access gaps when we talk about old and new antibiotics. We have a fragile pipeline, and that really is to a very large degree due to the market failures there. And of course, there is an issue around financing, both for research and development and for access and sustainable use. So all of these factors are really contributing to a very complex picture, and unfortunately, it's a reason why organizations like GARDP do need to exist. Just a little bit about us, GARDP facts and figures. We are, as Jennifer mentioned, an independent foundation. We are actually registered in Switzerland, and we are currently in the process of seeking international organization status. We have been co-founded by the World Health Organization as part of their Global Action Plan and the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. And we have now set up a scientific advisory board and a board of directors as part of the governance structures. GARDP has already started operational activities. So just looking at least on the research and development side, we are, of course, working on a first-in-class antibiotic that's now entering phase 3. We have 4 recovered antibiotics in different phases of development. We have several new chemical entities that we are now under discussions with potential biotech companies. We have started some very small early stage R&D activities. So we are currently screening 4 libraries for antibiotic activity. And we have actually to date completed 3 clinical studies, clinical trials. So we are in the process of actually continuing to fundraise for our current and future activities, and to say we are largely a government-funded organization at present. And as you can see in the photo, there is now actually a team behind GARDP, as well as a very wide network of partners that also are significantly important in executing the operations of GARDP. So GARDP for us, does represent a very unique approach in addressing AMR and trying to address this issue of the R&D pipeline and really the failures that we're seeing in how how I think different sectors can accelerate the development of new therapeutics. From our perspective, GARDP takes a very strong public health R&D perspective. We are therefore here to address global health priorities, incorporating the needs also of developing countries as well as developed countries. Our principle is that we work from any entry point, but wherever we start, we go all the way through registration and into access. And any given one of our projects, we are engaging with multiple different actors in a collaborative approach. We are also here to target important indications that are less likely to be developed by other actors, and also ensure that new antibiotics developed are affordable and available in high burden countries. And I think it's through this that we feel that we can best address the issue around the SDGs and also help to meet the WHO to meet the Global Action Plan against AMR. We have now, as part of our new business strategy, formulated a new vision and mission, which is presented here on the slides. All infections are treatable for everyone, everywhere. Really our mission is to bring together the public and private sectors to develop and deliver new treatments for bacterial infections, addressing the public health impact of antibiotic resistance. So really, this is really to emphasize that we are here to develop and to deliver. We are going to focus likely on late stage R&D going into access. Our modus operandi is to work with bring together the public and the private sector, considering that a lot of the innovation is largely in the private sector, and that we believe in developing strong, equitable partnerships, particularly with the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries. This is really a kind of overview or snapshot of GARDP. And of course, within our partnerships, beyond our private sector partners, we are incorporating academia, civil society, governments, and of course, our funders. Of course, as I mentioned, WHO has been very instrumental in helping to set up GARDP, and we have a very close collaboration with the World Health Organization. WHO plays an extremely important role in the global response against antimicrobial resistance. They are part of the tripartite, and of course, many of you may be familiar with the interagency coordination group that has come up with very clear recommendations, and WHO is really playing an important role there. WHO is really working to do the priority setting, provide technical input. It convenes international experts and meetings for us. It is there to provide the global development and stewardship framework, particularly around access. It has helped GARDP to mobilize political support of member states. And it's really helped to bring in GARDP, and not just GARDP, but AMR in general, into the G20, G7, and other international fora. And of course, on a day-to-day basis, we are interacting with multiple departments within WHO. Of course, the newly created AMR division, which is led by the new Assistant Director General, Dr. Hanan Balki, the disease departments, such as the Sexual Reproductive Health Department, and of course, the essential medicines programs that plays a very important role in health policy and access. And of course, we also work with the regional and country offices of WHO. So our new business strategy is really framed around our commitment of what we can deliver between 2020 and 2025. So we have launched a new 5x25 strategy where we are committed to develop and deliver 5 new treatments to address antibiotic-resistant infections by 2025. And to give you an example, what kind of treatments are we aiming to develop? Of course, they will be based on the WHO priority pathogen list. So they could include, for instance, treatments for carbapenem-resistant Cyanobacter infections or carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae infections. But also we are looking at specific diseases and indications as well. So this will include sexually transmitted infections. And of course, we are focusing also not just on adult populations, but also on children and pediatric and neonatal populations. So we are trying to take a kind of 3-lens approach with the pathogens, the populations, and of course, specific indications as well. And we will be focused on developing assets in late-stage clinical development and working on accelerating their access as well. Now, obviously, to achieve this, even if we are relying on other entities and other organizations and funders who will be providing and funding a lot of these projects as well as funding from the private sector, we still believe we need significant financial resources to achieve this 5 by 25 goal. So we are really calling to raise 500 million to accelerate the development and delivery of these 5 new treatments by 2025, and we have already started an active engagement to achieve this objective. So a little bit about how GARDP works. We have our vision and mission, and within our mission, we have the different strategic pillars of GARDP. And we have 4 strategic pillars that we have developed as part of our new business strategy. But in fact, to be honest, this is already, I would say, the current modus operandi of GARDP. So probably the more well-known pillar is what we do around research and development, where we are addressing global health needs. In the R&D pillar, we have both some in-house expertise as well as a network of partners and service providers who work closely with us as well. We focus on clinical and pharmaceutical development, and we will work both on regulatory and public health trials and work towards label expansion as well as evidence generation for optimum implementation. And of course, this will mean that we will require significant resources, because the downstream part is really where one needs significant resources to conduct these activities. We will also maintain a small number of projects in the discovery and exploratory phase. And of course, we aim to work very closely with other initiatives such as CARB-X, because ultimately we are here to also work in taking forward I think promising candidates coming out of the CARB-X pipeline as well. The second pillar is based around our portfolio management, and in a way this is really trying to ensure that we can coordinate and move forward key drugs of public health value within what we call a public health portfolio. So within this portfolio, we are committed to build, invest and co-develop with our private sector partners. We are willing to provide both in-kind and direct contributions to them in return for contractual returns around access, of which I will mention more of that later. And of course, what we're trying to ensure is that we have the freedom and rights to develop for public health indications, as well as register and deliver these tools in high burden countries and specific target populations. The third pillar is key because we are a partnership and we work through a partnership model. So this pillar is really concerning partnerships and networks, and they are really all the multiple different entities that we have already got together with and that we hope to also partner in the future to help us really deliver on our mission. So within us as the GARDP team, we want to stay as a fairly lean team, and what we really intend to do is work directly in collaboration and partnerships with a range of different actors to help us execute our mission. And through doing this, we also hope to therefore continue to enrich the R&D ecosystem in the AMR drug development space. We hope to strengthen clinical trial networks, incorporating high burden countries, for instance, and we also want to build these strategic partnerships that are going to be directly involved in accelerating and delivering on R&D programs. And a key part of what we will do is really bring together the public and private sector in our partnership model. And the last pillar, last but not least, is really around sustainable access. This will, of course, be focused on our portfolio of drugs that we have, but there are different things that we are intending to look at, such as how can we accelerate a global regulatory approach and ensure access in a wide range of countries. And some of you may be familiar of a recent publication that showed that, in fact, due to a variety of different factors, many of the new antibiotics that were coming onto the market were registered in a very small number of countries. We also intend to work on how we can look at things like cost of goods and streamlining manufacturing and really ensuring that we have a sustainable supply, really linking with third parties, including antibiotic manufacturers and generic companies. The third aspect is around reimbursement models and linked to that also procurement strategies. We feel both aspects are very important to address. I think if we don't look at reimbursement, we are going to run into significant problems around the long-term sustainable access of these antibiotics. And I think this is very much fitting into also WHO's own strategy around fair pricing. So it is something that we will need to look at for the portfolio of drugs that we are working at, and we are committed to work with our private sector partners as well as governments on this. I think in procurement, there's much that has been done in the global health space. We feel there are some opportunities to really look at how procurement can be approached to really ensure that, for instance, we can look at much more predictable demand, we can accelerate access, and we can also ensure that the approach on how antibiotics are introduced and how sales are approached are different. So I think we do feel that we do need to look at and engage with other global health actors and see how we can advocate for others to be involved and potentially do interventions both for potentially a small number of old and new antibiotics, and particularly also to focus on procurement for high burden countries. When we look at policy and guidelines, for us, we feel this is absolutely essential to not just ensure access, but appropriate use and therefore stewardship. So GARDP is committed towards engaging to both directly and indirectly support studies and evidence generation that will inform and guide policy and use. And this is often an overlooked piece, particularly post-registration, but can be important in better determining the use of a new antibiotic that's coming onto the market. And last and not least, obviously, we are going to be looking at how we can support in and out licensing strategies. And this is absolutely critical to look at sustainable manufacturing and supply of antibiotics in different regions of the world. And then cutting across that is the work we're going to do around financing, and of course what we have to do as an organization to develop to ensure we can deliver on these strategic pillars, as well as having the a transparent and open governance that will make us, a trustable partner to engage with both the public and private sector. And this slide really goes into a little bit more granularity on the previous slide. So looking at how we bridge this gap between R&D and access, and looking at how we utilize the partnership model to do this. Starting at the bottom, we are targeting public health needs. And through that, once we have done that, including with other actors such as WHO, we start to build a public health portfolio and then conduct or finance R&D programs through direct or in-kind investments, and secure affordable access through negotiated partnerships. And then work through the process with our partners and work through that through registration and facilitating policy guidelines, use, out-licensing strategies, and how we can then support rollout of new treatments. And to do this, we will leverage both the public and private R&D ecosystem, and there's a range of different actors that may be involved in any specific individual project that we are engaged in, with the objective of ultimately accelerating access to all in need. Practically speaking, what does our operations look like? Obviously, we have a small number of discovery and exploratory program, exploratory work, and in the middle piece, it's really about asset evaluation. So what are the key assets out there that we can identify and then engage in a significant manner in the clinical development stage? And I will really say clinical and pharmaceutical development, because we are also actively engaging with partners on, for instance, CMC and pharmaceutical development. We have 4 programs for the late stage development, such as the first program is on sexually transmitted infections. The second and third is on neonatal sepsis and also on accelerating the development of pediatric antibiotics, particularly new chemical entities in the pipeline, how we can accelerate the pediatric studies and pediatric indications. And lastly, this is a new program that we will be commencing in our new business plan, a program on adult serious gram-negative bacterial infections. So here we will be engaging with companies to really see how we can support them in There are late-stage clinical development to facilitate registration, but also beyond that, how we can expand indications, how we can also do the additional public health trials that will be critical for policy guidelines use, and ultimately also things like reimbursement. So I think, you know, there's a lot of technical aspects that one has to cover here, and we obviously will need to carefully choose and build our portfolio to deliver on these programs. And cutting across our R&D programs are the scientific affairs, including the Revive project that is really extremely important in helping us do our outreach to provide education, knowledge sharing. So what does building successful partnerships with the private sector look like? This slide is really a very top level slide, and I would like to make it very clear that no, we don't have a cut and paste agreement with companies, and even within a company we may have different agreements for different drug development projects. But broadly speaking, we are willing to provide R&D sponsorship, including what we can, taking on sponsorship of clinical trials and also on CMC development, and also provide our in-house expertise, so providing that as also as an in-kind support. We also provide access to the GARDP network, including a network we are starting to really support in high burden countries, and then also engage in post-regulatory activities, as I mentioned, such as phase 4 trials. And I think importantly, we can provide this R&D sponsorship and fund all of the trials, but we can also provide upfront funding for specific entities who are already engaged in sponsoring their own activities. But of course, this will have to be carefully crafted and have to be milestone driven. And so this is really going to depend on a company by company basis, on a project by project basis. It will depend on what you in the companies have in terms of your own in-house expertise, your own infrastructure, your own resources, who else you're partnering with, who are your service providers, what commitments you've already made to other investors. And on the flip side of the coin, you know, where are your gaps? And so we will tailor make an agreement to best fit that scenario. Of course, we will have requests on our side. So we will need to have some oversight on what you are doing. This could be set up through things like joint steering committees, for instance, and through reporting mechanisms. We will need to obviously agree on a common R&D and access strategy. That's a given, because we see ourselves as a partner. And so we need to clearly elucidate what are realistic and achievable stewardship and access commitments that we can make. We can also look at exclusive licenses in priority countries, particularly high burden developing countries as an example of that, where we know that marketing the product may be a struggle for certain companies. So this is something that we are willing to take on. And we will, of course, discuss things like royalties on sales to support access in these high burden settings as well. So we, as ourselves, are also committed to trying and finding, multiple and sustainable financing mechanisms for our programs and projects. And of course, we do have to ensure affordability globally, but also, of course, for developing countries, this will be an issue. And I, of course, very much regret that we have to put in this last issue, but we do indeed have to think about how in the deal structure, we will deal with things like bankruptcy and change of control as well. So these are things that I think we can manage, we can do, and we are already engaging with a few private sector entities to discuss this. So this is not set in stone. This is going to be tailor-made. We are realistic on what we ask, because it will be tied to what we put in. So clearly, the more we put in, the more we will ask back. But I think for all of you who are working in this space, this is a very reasonable approach. So then going to the next slide, which really talks about the collaborative partnership model. As you can see, there are many different sectors one has to engage in, even on an individual drug development project. This can provide some complexity in terms of managing all these relationships. And this is something in GARDP that we have experience as individuals doing. But we feel this kind of complex relationships are, of course, essential in approaching drug development from an international perspective and trying to address global health needs. And we will work largely as a virtual organization, through these partnerships, and really will seek to ensure multi-stakeholder collaborations where they are relevant. We can be involved in actively driving programs, and in other areas where that's less appropriate because of the resources of the entity we're partnering with. This can be more funding, direction, and support. And of course, we have in-house capabilities as well as a network of experts and partners that will be involved in our R&D programs. So what does access look like to us? There are different aspects that we are starting to look at in access, ranging from procurement to reimbursement to outsourcing strategies, policy use, regulatory licensing. But we are not necessarily going to be fully involved in all these different spaces. There can be light levels of engagement on one side to heavy levels of engagement. And we may advocate or facilitate or implement or do all three. And so that will probably be based more on the individual program, project, and partnership we form. But clearly, we feel that we will probably be more involved in things like working on CMC, cost of goods, on the networking and partnership building, on policy use, on expanding global registration, and where relevant on supporting in and out licensing as well. And there are other areas where we will need to play a supportive role and or facilitatory role. And I would emphasize that, of course, we are also engaged with WHO, who are really involved in policy making. So our role is to generate the evidence. WHO's role is to set policy and guidelines. So just to ensure that there's no confusion between those two aspects.